Hello everyone, it's Joseph Dunphy here, and this is your weekly Grass10 Grazing Management Update on the Dairy Edge. On this week's podcast, following on from our end of year webinar last week, I'm delighted to be joined by Ciaran Hearn from PastureBase Ireland. Ciaran, you're very welcome.
Thanks for having me, Joe.
So Ciaran, you join me today. We're going to chat a little bit about, I suppose, the grazing year from 2024 and maybe making better use of your PastureBase Ireland reports. If we take a little bit of a look back at 2024, it was a very variable year for grass growth. Can you put some figures on it for us?
We all know it was a strange year for growing grass, and the main part of the year there where we saw the big differences was that kind of April-May period where grass growth lagged behind the 5 and 10 year averages, so the longer term figures that we look at. So in terms of April, like we see that even towards the end of April, we were only just about breaking a growth of 50 a day, whereas usually that could be up in the 60s at that time of year. So it was very slow to kind of hit those peaks, and when it did, the peak was short lived. So when we look at it now from a kind of a longer term point of view, we see that the grass growth on the 5 year average was back about a ton, and on the longer term 10 year average is about a ton and a half for 2024.
Okay, yeah. So a very difficult and variable, I suppose, early and middle part of the year. And did the end of the year help things out on farm, Ciaran?
So it did, I suppose. Like, you know, we all know we got a bit of a kick there, kind of from kind of mid-September onwards. The grass growth was a good bit better than what we would have seen in terms of kind of previous grass growing years. Like it could have been 10 or 15 kilos ahead there at times of where we expected to be in October and November. But you know, that's the end of the year, and we didn't see that as being a huge benefactor. It didn't make up that ton deficit that was seen earlier in the year. So it was a little bit of a help, and maybe it helped cows to stay out on paddocks a little bit longer in the fine autumn that we had. But in terms of total tonnage, it didn't make a huge difference at the end of the year.
And Ciaran, probably throughout the middle part of the summer, we were kind of seeing a lot of people asking about the fodder situation on farms. You know, maybe looking at the fodder budget that's built into PastureBase. Is there any figures from that? You know, telling us where we are at the minute?
So we have a bit of a read on it, and we did a little bit of work with Joe Patton, I suppose, earlier in the year as well, kind of that September time of the year, and at that time stocks were relatively good on farms. I think there was enough fodder there for the winter, and given the good back end that we had, maybe people wouldn't have used as much as they expected to use kind of at the end of October, start November time. So stocks are reasonably good on farms. We don't have an up-to-date reading right now in terms of what guys are filling out, but I suppose the change on PastureBase this year for the fodder budget, we've changed it from one fodder budget that you fill in at the start of the winter or kind of in September to an ongoing fodder budget. And the way that we see this working is that guys might be able to fill this out once every couple of weeks, just to fill out a new one once every couple of weeks in a very similar way that you would do a grass walk every week, Joe. So you can see how much fodder that you're using each week and how much or how many days feed you have ahead of you before you run out. And this just gives people a chance to get ahead of a shortage that might be coming in March. They can get ahead of it in January rather than panicking when the problem arises. So that's the new tool on PastureBase around fodder, and we would encourage people to fill it out and to use it, as it will help you to plan for the kind of medium term rather than a short term fodder issue that you might have on farm. At the other side of it, then, as you're making fodder or conserving fodder, sorry, in the summer period, you can record that in the fodder available budget, and it'll tot up all the bales that you make as you go along, as you add to it over the course of the year.
Great stuff. Thanks for that, Ciaran. And I suppose just back to a bit of the variability that we're talking in terms of grass growth, and you know, obviously 2024 was variable, but we have seen a little bit more variability over the last number of years. Is there any trends that are appearing throughout the pasture-based figures for that, you know, maybe some of our listeners have been essentially living through over the last few years?
We consider maybe the years since 2018 when we got that very bad drought, the weather in every year almost, maybe except 2020, but in every other year the weather has been tough in places between, you know, a wet spring or a wet back end, and then you're coming into dry periods in the summer, and it's even variable across the country. So we actually saw this year on the PastureBase webinar that grass grown in Carlow, which would be traditionally quite a good place to grow grass, was actually quite low, and a lot of this is probably coming from a summer dry period, whereas the rest of the country was up at an average of about almost 11.5, 12 ton in or around that. But that 12 ton is a long way back from the 14 and the 15 that would have been hit kind of 2017 time. So grass growth is back a little bit, I suppose, on where it was, and some of that is coming from policy implications of having to reduce nitrogen fertilizer on farm, and some of it is coming from those weather events. So maybe a combination of the both has seen grass growth in the last kind of 2 or 3 years drop back from where it was before that.
Yeah, and probably, Ciaran, there maybe a comment is there's probably extra concentrate and maybe silage having to be
Yeah.
brought into the diet there throughout that mid-season to get over that.
From our point of view, we would see that stocking rates are largely similar to what they were when that grass was being grown on the platform, and the cows were being you are mostly fed from that grazed grass. Now, obviously, grazed grass is still a large part of the diet, but we have seen a significant increase in the amount of supplement, be that silage or be that concentrate, that's being used in the grazing season. And I suppose guys might need to just have a look at their reports on PastureBase and have a look at their figures and see how much supplement they have actually fed in 2024, even 23 and 22 as well, and analyze themselves. Am I growing enough grass to support my stocking rate? And am I comfortable feeding this level of supplement in my own system? So all those figures are available for each individual farm on PastureBase, and I'd encourage people to have a look at that and assess where they're going for 2025.
So as you're saying, Ciaran, now is the time essentially to take a to take a look back, and it might be to take a look back at 2024, but also to take a look back at, if you have pasture-based figures over a number of years, to maybe see the trends for your own farm.
100%, and the opposite of what I said is true as well, Joe. Like there are farmers out there that are growing probably plenty of grass to feed all the animals they have, but they're still using excessive amounts of concentrate, um, where there's where there's a perceived lack of grass available, where guys aren't maybe doing enough walk. So get out, measure the grass, we'd say, and what you can't manage what you don't measure, and maybe guys are perceived that there's a lack of feed for the cows, whereas they get out, they walk the farm, they can make the decision then about pulling out concentrate where it's not required.
Perfect stuff. Ciaran, just if you were a beginner user to PastureBase in 2024, what are the key things that you would tell people to focus on now between now and and into 2025?
Just into 2025, I suppose, like we see a range of grass growing in pasture-based figures, and a lot of it we can nearly pick out the guys that are hitting 13, 14 tons, and there are a substantial amount of farmers out there that are able to do that in the last couple of years on average. They're averaging up around that 14 ton, and these are the people that are getting out doing the regular walks, but not just firing the figures onto the system, Joe. They're sitting down, they're analyzing it, whether it's on the wedge on the app on the phone, or whether they're sitting down at the desktop. They're taking that 5 minutes just to consider, right, what's my cover today? What's my predicted growth, or what's the predicted growth of the area for the week? Where am I going to be in 7 days' time? And what do I need to do today in order to maximize the grass in the cow's diet and to maximize the quality of that grass that the cow is getting? So whether that's a paddock that's at a cover of 2 or 2.5 ton, do I need to pull that out? Do I need to leave it in order to make sure that there's grass in the diet for the cow, or do I need to pull it out to maintain quality? Depending on what way that wedge looks at a given time in the year. So it's using the data that you generate for yourself and making the decision. And that's one of the big things. The other thing, I suppose, for beginners is, consider putting in a couple of your fertilizer records into PastureBase, because it really helps you when you're sitting down at the end of the year to see which paddocks got how much fertilizer, and maybe that's the reason that they didn't perform as well as some other paddocks in the system. It's very difficult for farmers to remember, where got a certain amount of fertilizer at a certain time of the year, and the response that you got to that. If you have all the figures in, you can analyze them yourselves. And look, I'm always saying this on these webinars and podcasts, Joe, but as far as fertilizer data goes in PastureBase, that's farmer data. We don't share it with anyone. The only way we use that is we anonymize it and use it for reports to review kind of annual performance of a set number of farms on average in a region or over a set period of time. It's never shared in terms of that personal information on a per farm basis with any other third party. So just to really emphasize that point, because that's usually a stumbling block that comes up regarding fertilizer records on PastureBase.
Yeah, and just to add to that, Ciaran, like, you know, the information that farmers have, if they build that bit of fertilizer information along with their grass grown tonnage and maybe the soil fertility info, if all that's there for 2 or 3 years, the information on PastureBase for you to make decisions off is absolutely massive.
Oh, it really adds to the value of the system and how much better you can manage what you've got on the farm in terms of being able to grow that tonnage and maximizing the grass in the cow's diet. So, you know, you're maximizing cow performance by maximizing the grass in the diet, and you're maximizing financial performance of the farm by optimizing the amount of grass that's in the cow's diet as well. So it really does help, and we can't stress enough the farmers that start recording fertilizer on PastureBase rarely stop. So once they get into it and they can see the value of it, we rarely hear guys that, oh yeah, no, I started at that, but I gave it up because I wasn't getting that out of it. We very rarely hear that story, Joe.
Great stuff. And just, Ciaran, for, we call it the more advanced user that has 5-6 years of 30 plus walks a year on farm, what do you want them to focus on now and into 2025?
Well, where we see them going now, Joe, is making use of the data that's there. Like, you know, they've generated all this data as we just spoke about. You know, you've got the walks. They've probably got a bit of soil fertility data. They've probably got a bit of fertilizer data if they're doing all those walks. Sit down maybe with a cup of tea in the first week of January of a Tuesday or Wednesday morning and actually look at what happened on your farm in 2024, compare it to 23 and 22, and see maybe what paddocks weren't performing, maybe earmark a couple for reseeding, that type of thing. Go a bit further, maybe create a nitrogen plan for your farm and target those paddocks that are lower in clover for maybe a higher rate of nitrogen, and the ones that have the higher levels of clover, maybe there's an opportunity for you to pull back some of the nitrogen there and save a few pounds and increase the quality of the sward as well, where you're maximizing the clover in there. Look, there's a world of tools on PastureBase, but it's really when you're using them and you're using the likes of a fodder budget and you're using the likes of grass budgets, it's now to review. So to review what you've done and make a plan for 2025. The guys that are after generating all the data now have an opportunity to use that in order to optimize their own system for whatever goals they want to set for themselves.
Great stuff. And Ciaran, lastly, to finish, any new developments on PastureBase for 2025?
So look, our big development for 2025 and the area that we want to target is better feedback to farmers. So at the moment within the PastureBase system, you know, you'll get a little red box or a warning if your cover is a bit too high in the mid-season or a bit too low, you know, in that May time, if you're going under the 500, that type of thing. But we want it to be better than that, and we want farmers, you know, to get prompts within the system to help them to make those decisions once they've done the cover. So when something is happening on farm, a little alarm bell to raise just to draw the farmer's attention to something that's happening within the system and something that we feel, you know, they need to take action on in that moment in order to maximize their grass growth for the year.
Great stuff. Listen, Ciaran, there's a huge amount of information there. Thanks very much for joining me on today's podcast.
Thanks, Joe. It was great to be on, and hopefully back again soon.
And for those of you who missed our webinar on Tuesday, the 10th of December, you can find the link on X and Instagram, our two social media channels, and it's also on the Grass10 page on the Teagasc public website. It's just over 1 hour in total, so if you want to make better use of the PastureBase platform in 2025, make sure to watch back. And if you'd like to hear more from the Grass10 team, subscribe to the weekly Grass10 newsletter, which is available on the Grass10 page on the Teagasc public website. And the link to the newsletter is also available in the description of this podcast. We would also like to thank the sponsors of the Grass10 campaign, AIB, Grassland Agro, Department of Agriculture, FBD, and the Farmers Journal. I would like to wish all our listeners a happy Christmas and a prosperous new year, and our podcast will be back in early 2025.